What happens when a late-night interview goes from friendly banter to explosive confrontation in front of a live studio audience? It only took one comment about privilege for everything to unravel, and 37 seconds later, security was escorting a royal guest off the set of Late Night with Seth Meyers. The studio lights were bright that evening as Meghan Markle walked onto the stage in a stunning designer gown that probably cost more than most people make in a year. The audience erupted in applause. Seth Meyers stood up from behind his desk, greeting her with his trademark friendly smile and a warm handshake. "Welcome to the show," Seth said, gesturing to the guest chair. "Thanks for being here." Meghan settled into her seat, crossing her legs and flashing a practiced smile at the cameras. "Thanks for having me," she replied, though her tone already carried an edge that made some audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Seth jumped right into the interview, keeping things light. "So, you've been pretty vocal lately about media treatment and privacy. Can you tell us more about that?" Meghan's expression changed instantly. Her smile faded and her eyes narrowed. "Well, Seth, I think it's important that people understand what I've been through. The press has been absolutely brutal to me in ways that no one else has ever experienced." Seth nodded politely, maintaining his professional composure. "I'm sure it's been challenging. A lot of public figures deal with intense media scrutiny." "A lot of public figures?" Meghan interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "Seth, with all due respect, you have no idea what it's like to be in my position. No one has faced what I've faced." The audience went quiet. You could feel the tension building in the room like a storm gathering strength. Seth kept his cool, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "I think many people in the public eye have dealt with difficult press coverage," Seth said carefully. "I mean, we've had politicians, actors, musicians on this show who've all shared similar stories." Meghan leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Are you seriously comparing their experiences to mine? That's incredibly dismissive, Seth." Seth's eyebrows raised slightly, but he maintained his calm demeanor. "I'm not dismissing your experience at all. I'm just saying that you're not alone in dealing with media challenges." "Not alone?" Meghan's voice went up another notch. "Seth, I gave up everything. My career, my life, my privacy. I became part of one of the most famous families in the world, and the treatment I received was unlike anything anyone has ever endured." The audience was completely silent now. Some people were exchanging glances, wondering where this was going. Seth took a breath, clearly trying to remain the professional host he always was. "I understand you've made sacrifices," Seth said, "but I think we can acknowledge that while also recognizing that other people have their own struggles too." Meghan's face flushed red. "Other people? Other people don't understand what it means to have the entire world watching your every move, judging everything you do, twisting your words." Seth gently interjected. "Well, actually, a lot of people in entertainment and politics do experience that. I mean, just last week we had a congresswoman on who talked about the death threats she receives daily." "Death threats?" Meghan scoffed, actually scoffed on camera. "Everyone gets death threats online, Seth. That's not the same as the systemic persecution I've faced." The audience gasped. A few people actually gasped out loud. Seth's expression shifted from friendly to visibly surprised. "I don't think we should minimize death threats," Seth said, his voice firmer now. "Those are serious, and the congresswoman I mentioned has had to have constant security because of legitimate threats to her life." Meghan waved her hand dismissively. "Security, please. You think having security is hard? Try having security while also being trapped in an institution that's trying to silence you. Try being told you can't speak your truth while photographers are literally hunting you down." Seth leaned back in his chair, and you could see him processing what was happening. His producer was probably screaming in his earpiece, but Seth kept his composure. "Meghan, I want to be respectful here, but I think a lot of people would say that being a working single parent without security, struggling to pay rent, or dealing with actual persecution in other countries might constitute harder circumstances. Meghan's jaw dropped. Did you seriously just say that to me? Are you actually lecturing me about hard circumstances? I'm not lecturing anyone, Seth said calmly. I'm trying to have a balanced conversation. Balanced? Meghan stood up from her chair. The audience let out a collective murmur. There's nothing balanced about you sitting there in your privileged position, hosting your little show, trying to tell me that my suffering doesn't matter. Seth remained seated, his hands folded on his desk. I never said your suffering doesn't matter. I'm saying that other people suffer too, and we should have empathy for all of it. Empathy? Meghan's voice was getting louder. You want to talk to me about empathy? I've shown nothing but empathy my entire life. I've been an activist, a humanitarian. What have you done, Seth? Tell jokes for a living? The audience was completely stunned. Some people looked angry. Others looked uncomfortable. Seth's face remained calm, but you could see the disappointment in his eyes. I think comedy has value, Seth said quietly. And yes, I try to use this platform to highlight important issues and give voice to people who need it. But I've never claimed my job is the hardest thing in the world. Oh, so now you're taking shots at me? Meghan shot back. You're saying I think I have the hardest life in the world. You literally just said no one has faced what you've faced, Seth pointed out, his voice still measured and calm. Meghan's face went even redder. Because it's true. The intersection of racism, sexism, and being in the royal family, no one else has dealt with that exact combination. Seth nodded slowly. That specific combination might be unique, but that doesn't mean other combinations of discrimination and hardship aren't equally valid or difficult. Equally valid? Meghan threw her hands up. So a woman who faces racism in the royal spotlight is the same as someone who faces racism at, what, a grocery store? The audience actually groaned at that. Several people shook their heads. Seth's expression hardened, just slightly. All racism is serious and harmful, Seth said, his voice taking on a firmer edge, whether it happens in a palace or a grocery store. And I think most people would agree that dismissing someone's experience because of where it happens is pretty troubling. Troubling? Meghan laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was bitter and sharp. You know what's troubling, Seth? Having people like you try to minimize what I've been through by comparing it to everyday situations. Everyday situations? Seth repeated. Meghan, we're talking about people's real lives. People who face discrimination while also worrying about feeding their kids or keeping a roof over their heads. That's not an everyday situation. That's survival. Meghan pointed at Seth, her finger shaking. Don't you dare try to make me feel guilty for speaking my truth. I have every right to talk about my experience without you or anyone else trying to rank it against others. And I'm not ranking anything, Seth said, his patience clearly wearing thin but still holding on. I'm asking for perspective. There's a difference between sharing your story and claiming no one else has suffered like you have. I never said no one else has suffered, Meghan's voice echoed through the studio. Seth raised his eyebrows. Actually, you did. Multiple times tonight. You said no one has faced what you've faced, that no one understands, that your experience is unlike anything anyone has endured. Meghan froze for a second, realizing she'd been caught in her own words, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. That's taken out of context, she snapped. It's literally what you just said, like 2 minutes ago, Seth replied, and now there was an edge in his voice too. The audience heard it. The cameras recorded it. There's no context that changes those words. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Meghan's voice cracked slightly. This is the persecution I face. People twisting my words, attacking me, refusing to listen. Meghan, Seth said, and his voice was firm now, the friendly host persona completely gone. No one is twisting your words. No one is persecuting you. I asked you about media scrutiny, and you've spent the last, Several minutes dismissing other people's struggles and claiming yours are uniquely terrible. That's not persecution. That's called being challenged on your perspective. The audience burst into applause. They actually applauded Seth. Meghan looked stunned, staring at the crowd like she couldn't believe what was happening. "How dare you?" she whispered, but the microphone picked it up. "How dare you turn the audience against me?" "I didn't turn anyone against anyone," Seth said. "People respond to what they hear, and what they heard tonight was you dismissing death threats, minimizing other people's experiences with racism, and suggesting that working at a grocery store somehow makes discrimination less serious." "That's not what I said," Meghan shouted. "Then what did you say?" Seth asked, his voice cutting through her protest. "Because from where I'm sitting, and from where everyone watching is sitting, that's exactly what came out of your mouth." Meghan's hands were shaking now. "You don't understand. You can't understand. You're just another man trying to silence a woman who's speaking her truth." Seth let out a long breath. "And there it is. When you can't defend your actual words, you make it about me being a man." Meghan, some of the most powerful voices we've had on this show have been women. Women who've faced incredible hardships. Women who've been activists and leaders. And not one of them has ever stood on this stage and dismissed other people's pain the way you have tonight. "I came here to share my story." Meghan's voice was shrill now. "And I invited you to do that," Seth shot back, his own voice rising for the first time. "But sharing your story doesn't require you to diminish everyone else's. You can talk about your experience without claiming it's worse than everyone else's. You can discuss the challenges you've faced without mocking people who receive death threats or who face racism in their daily lives." Meghan's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The audience was completely riveted, watching this confrontation unfold in real time. "I don't have to sit here and take this," Meghan finally said, her voice icy. "You're absolutely right," Seth agreed. "You don't. This is a voluntary appearance. But if you're going to be on this show, you're going to be asked questions. You're going to have your statements challenged when they're problematic. That's what happens in an interview. That's what happens when you're in the public eye and you say things that are dismissive and hurtful to others." "Hurtful?" Meghan practically spat the word. "I'm the one who's been hurt. I'm the victim here." Seth shook his head slowly. "See, that's the problem right there. You're so focused on being the victim that you can't see how your words affect other people. You're so wrapped up in your own narrative that you can't extend the empathy you're demanding from everyone else." "This interview is over," Meghan declared, ripping off her microphone. "The interview was over the moment you started dismissing other people's pain," Seth said quietly. Meghan turned to storm off the stage, but Seth wasn't done. "You know what's really sad about this?" Seth called after her. "You had a platform tonight. You could have used it to talk about real issues, to bring attention to important causes, to connect with people who are struggling. Instead, you used it to center yourself and to tear down anyone who dared suggest that suffering isn't a competition you've won." Meghan whirled around, her face a mask of rage. "You have no right to judge me." "I'm not judging you," Seth said, standing up now. "I'm responding to what you said on my show, to my audience. And what you said was offensive. It was tone-deaf, and it showed a complete lack of awareness about how privileged you actually are to even be in a position where your biggest complaint is media coverage." "Privileged?" Meghan shrieked. "You think I'm privileged?" "Yes," Seth said simply. "I do. You have wealth, fame, a platform, resources most people can't even dream of. That doesn't erase the challenges you faced, but it does mean you have tools to deal with those challenges that most people don't have. And using your privilege to claim you've suffered more than anyone else, that's not brave. That's not speaking truth to power. That's just punching down." The audience erupted again. this time in sustained applause. Meghan looked around the studio wildly, as if searching for someone who would defend her. But the crew members were silent. The audience was clapping, and Seth just stood there behind his desk, waiting. "You'll regret this," Meghan said, her voice shaking. "I doubt it," Seth replied. "What I would regret is not saying something when someone uses my platform to belittle other people's struggles. What I would regret is staying silent while someone with enormous privilege complains that no one else could possibly understand hardship." Meghan opened her mouth one more time, but whatever she was going to say died on her lips. Instead, she turned and started walking toward the exit, her heels clicking loudly on the studio floor. But she couldn't leave without one final outburst. She stopped at the edge of the stage, turned back to the camera, and said, "This is exactly why I left. This is the kind of treatment I was talking about. And all of you," she gestured to the audience, "all of you who are applauding this attack, you're part of the problem." The audience went silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of people who'd heard enough, who'd watched someone dig themselves deeper and deeper, and who were done being lectured. Seth walked out from behind his desk, something he rarely did during confrontations. He walked to the front of the stage and spoke directly to Meghan. "This isn't an attack," he said, his voice clear and steady. "This is accountability. You came on this show and said things that were hurtful and dismissive. You minimized death threats. You mocked people who face racism in their everyday lives. You claimed your suffering was unique and incomparable. And when you were called out on it, you blamed everyone else. That's not being attacked. That's facing the natural consequences of your words." "I'm leaving," Meghan said, but she still didn't move. "Then leave," Seth said, not unkindly. "But know that you're not leaving because you were attacked or persecuted or silenced. You're leaving because you couldn't handle being held accountable for what you said." That was it. That was the moment. Meghan's face went through about 5 different emotions in rapid succession. Shock, anger, indignation, something that might have been embarrassment, and finally, cold fury. She turned without another word and walked off the stage, but she didn't head for the main exit. She walked toward the backstage area, where the security and crew were stationed. You could hear her voice, still loud even though she was off camera now, demanding things, making accusations, her words tumbling over each other in angry fragments. The audience sat in complete silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. Seth walked back to his desk and sat down, running a hand through his hair. "Well," he said into the microphone, his voice a little shaky now that the adrenaline was fading. "That was unexpected." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. "Look," Seth continued, "I want to be clear about something. I don't enjoy confrontation. I don't like conflict. But I also can't sit here and let someone use this platform to dismiss other people's pain. I can't let someone claim that their suffering is somehow more valid or more important than everyone else's. Because it's not. Pain is pain. Struggle is struggle. And we all deserve empathy and respect, regardless of our circumstances." The audience applauded again, and this time it was warm, supportive. "We're going to take a quick break," Seth said. "When we come back, we'll try to get back to our regularly scheduled programming, if that's still possible after whatever that was." The cameras cut, and the studio erupted in chaos. Producers were running around. Crew members were talking rapidly into headsets, and audience members were turning to each other with wide eyes and animated gestures. Backstage, Meghan's voice could still be heard, now arguing with someone, possibly a producer or security. Her words were muffled, but the anger in her tone was crystal clear. Seth sat at his desk, talking quietly with his producer, who had rushed over during the break. They were clearly discussing what to do next, how to handle this situation, whether they could even continue with the show. An audience member near the front later reported that they heard Meghan demanding that the footage be deleted, that she be given a chance to redo the interview, that Seth apologize. to her on camera. The crew, apparently, declined all of these demands. The situation escalated quickly from there. Security was called not to protect anyone, but to escort Meghan out of the building because she was refusing to leave and was disrupting the production. She was yelling about lawsuits, about her lawyers, about how this would ruin Seth's career. The irony was lost on no one. It took 3 security guards and a very patient production assistant to finally guide Meghan toward the exit. Even then, she was shouting over her shoulder, making threats, playing the victim card so hard it was practically laminated. Back in the studio, Seth had composed himself. When the cameras came back on, he addressed the audience directly. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight, and for witnessing that with me," he said. "I know that wasn't what anyone expected when they came to see a late-night talk show. But I think it's important that we talk about this, because what happened here tonight happens in bigger and smaller ways, every single day." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We live in a world where everyone wants to be heard, and that's good. Everyone deserves to tell their story. But we also live in a world where some people think that telling their story means silencing everyone else's. Where some people think that being a victim gives them the right to victimize others, and that's not okay." The audience was hanging on every word. What you witnessed tonight was someone who couldn't handle the idea that other people might have struggles too. Someone who thought that their pain was so unique, so special, that it gave them permission to dismiss everyone else's. And when they were called out on it, they couldn't accept responsibility. They blamed me. They blamed you. They blamed the institution, the system, the world. Everyone except themselves. Seth's voice grew stronger, more passionate. And I'm not saying this to pile on. I'm saying this because it's a pattern we see everywhere. In politics, in entertainment, in social media. People who demand empathy but refuse to give it. People who claim they want dialogue but really just want validation. People who see any pushback as persecution. He looked directly into the camera. If there's one thing I hope people take away from tonight, it's this. Your pain matters. Your struggle matters. Your story matters. But so does everyone else's. And the moment you start ranking suffering, the moment you start claiming your experience is worse than everyone else's, you lose the moral high ground. You lose the right to demand empathy because you're refusing to extend it. The audience gave him a standing ovation. They stood up and they clapped, and some of them were wiping their eyes because what Seth said resonated with something deep inside them. When the applause finally died down, Seth smiled. A real smile this time, tired but genuine. "Okay," he said, "I think we've had enough drama for one night. Let's bring out our musical guest and end this show on a high note, because we could all use some good music right about now." The band started playing, the lights shifted, and the show moved on. But nobody in that studio, nobody watching at home, would forget what they'd witnessed. The moment when a host stood his ground, when someone with a platform used it to speak truth, when the facade cracked and everyone saw what was underneath. Outside the studio building, Meghan was finally ushered into a waiting car. She was still talking, still protesting, still claiming victimhood, even as she climbed into a vehicle that cost more than most people's houses. Inside, Seth wrapped up the show, thanked his guests, thanked his audience, and said goodnight with the same warmth and professionalism he always brought to his job. The credits rolled. The audience filed out, buzzing with energy and disbelief. The crew started breaking down the set. And somewhere, someone was already uploading clips to the internet where the confrontation would be watched and rewatched millions of times. But in that moment, in that studio, with those people, something important had happened. Someone had said enough. Someone had drawn a line. Someone had reminded everyone that having a platform comes with responsibility, and that responsibility includes not letting people use it to hurt others. Seth Meyers had done his job that night. Not the job of making people laugh, though he usually did that well, but the job of holding people accountable, of standing up for what's right, of refusing to let someone's status or fame excuse their behavior. And Meghan Markle had made her exit, not in a blaze of glory, but in a storm of her own making. Not silenced or persecuted, but held accountable. Not attacked, but challenged, and unable to handle the difference between the two. The stage lights dimmed. The last audience member left. The studio grew quiet. But the echoes of that confrontation, of those 37 seconds that changed everything, would linger long after the cameras stopped rolling.